Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is a short review of the Kitchens book we just completed. And in doing so, I'll just walk through the guidelines with you in reference to the book and, just give you some tips and some, ways to approach, the report. We did this before with the first one, but, I'll take some time to be specific here with reference to Kitchens. But overall, basically doing the same thing as you did with the Veblen book earlier in the semester, but now kind of turn your attention to Fine's Kitchens. And so the first thing I'll say, is make sure that you are citing and using examples from the book to support your ideas, and be specific. Again, don't assume that the reader has read it. Don't assume that the reader knows what you're talking about. So explain your ideas fully, be specific, and use and cite the text to support your ideas. And how I approach that summary again would be how you would explain it to somebody, the main ideas of the book, what type of theory it is, generally speaking, what are they looking at within the theory. That's what we're looking at for the summary. And then again, getting specific to the construction of reality. What's that driving force? What's the driving force creating the reality under investigation? And for our purposes here, the reality under investigation is the creation of social order in restaurants. So before with Veblen, we were looking at the creation of social stratification, but here we're looking at the creation of social order in restaurants. So that's kind of the reality under examination. And so what's driving this reality? And so this goes back to kind of the middle year section of the class. The first part looking at American social thought. Basically, the theme that came up again and again with respect to the why was the psychological tension that people are trying to manage, that people are trying to avoid. And you see that going on here. So Fine does carry on that tradition, kind of brings it up a level. It's kind of a more social, psychological tension that people are trying to avoid. And so when you avoid the tensions, then order is likely to be created. But when the tensions come to the forefront, that's when disorder is going to emerge. So that's what we're looking at for the construction of reality. How people are, you know, navigating different obstacles, within the social, symbolic, and physical orders. And when you do that successfully, you're navigating that tension. And when you navigate that potential tension, then order can be established and maintained as a whole. And so, when looking at social structures, basically, we're connecting the social aspects. So, I think this book lends itself very well to kind of looking at structure and agency, because all those social forces, all the obstacles, the limitations, those all represent social structures, and how people recognize and kind of deal with the limitations and the obstacles. There's the agency. So, I think this fits the paper very well. Come up with a couple of examples of that relationship between structure and agency, looking at those social forces. Now people recognize and respond to the forces. And when the two come together, that's when the order can be created. That's when order can be maintained. And so when you're doing this, again, when you're looking at the structure, kind of shaping individual, the individual's decisions, and that's when you're looking at kind of that macro top-down approach. On the other hand, when you're kind of concentrating on the decision making, the recognizing social structures, that's when you're taking that more micro approach, looking at things from the bottom up. So again, kind of capture, you know, both sides of the coin, kind of looking at the interplay between the macro and the micro levels that come together in his framework when he's trying to explain the creation of social order. So overall, when it comes to the next part of the paper, again, students typically do well. When it comes to all these, the comparisons, the connections to life today, what you would add and change, just fully explain your ideas. And so again, if you're connecting it to Mead and Cooley, and you're going to look at the similarity tied into that psychological tension, explain that. Don't assume again that I know where you're going with it. Make sure you're explaining your ideas fully. And the same thing to connections to life today. You know, I think a lot of relevance is kind of seen today with the pandemic, and you have kind of new barriers, new obstacles you have to face. But again, explain those obstacles, explain those barriers that come with the pandemic and how they relate to Fine's book. And don't assume, again, that the reader is going to know what you're talking about. So finally, when it gets into that last part of the paper, what would you add or change? Again, explain kind of what you'd be adding, what you'd be changing, and don't say that you wouldn't change a thing. You're going to lose points if you do that. Just make sure that you're adding something to it or taking something away, and as a result, you believe that you're making it a better overall theory, and that's what I'm looking for in that last part of the paper. So you see, in all these, each thing asks you to think a little bit differently about the theory and the framework under examination. The kind of ongoings within the framework when you're looking at the construction of reality, structure and agency, macro micro focus. And then when I get into the comparisons, you have to think differently about the theory, connecting it today. Again, you're taking theory in a different direction, and what you would add or change about it, again, makes you approach the theory differently. And how you approach it differently helps you kind of learn it more holistically as well. So that's what I'm kind of looking for there, is kind of dealing with the theory, but different aspects throughout your paper. As long as you're kind of using the text, explaining your ideas fully, you should be in good shape. Everybody did pretty well on the first one. So I hope to see that continue here in the second report. So as always, I'm always happy to look at drafts of papers, full drafts, unfinished drafts. I'm more than happy to provide you feedback on anything you submit to me before the deadline. Otherwise, if you have any questions, always just let me know.